Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Melissa and this channel is all about psychiatric drug withdrawal, reactions, and recovery. And it draws on my 7 years of experience in this community and my own personal journey to recovery. And the probably thousands of conversations I've had at this point, both formally as a coach and informally, just throughout my years in this community. And the purpose of my channel is to provide hope in what often feels like a hopeless situation and to talk about topics and themes that come up regularly in my conversations. And none of it is meant to constitute medical advice, it's just drawing on these experiences. So the topic for today's video is flares or waves, setbacks, are a normal part of the journey for pretty much everybody. So I want to talk about that and kind of flesh that out a little bit. So before I get into it, I want to mention that I am coaching. So I have 30-minute calls and 60-minute calls, and I'll put my direct booking link in the description if you're interested in checking that out. So flares, waves, setbacks are pretty much a normal part of the journey for, I would say, everybody, if not like the vast majority of people. And what do I mean by that? So the way that I define a setback would be something fairly obvious that triggered a flare in symptoms. So this could be having to take a medication that your body's reacting to. It could be a supplement. It could be a surgery or an excessive amount of stress. Or sometimes people will try to have a drink of alcohol and then that sets them back. I mean, there's a whole host of reasons, but usually it has a fairly specific trigger. So I've talked about setbacks in other videos and some of the main causes. The waters get a little muddied because a wave is an increase in intensity of symptoms and things just really flare up. So that I'm kind of using these terms interchangeably. However, again, a setback usually has a fairly obvious cause, and a wave can have a cause, but sometimes it just happens out of nowhere. Regardless, these flare-ups of symptoms happen to pretty much everybody. So whether you are tapering and you've had a bit of a crash, again, that's another term that I use, same type of thing. Symptoms have just flared up and the person is panicking, or, they've reinstated and things are seeming to stabilize and then stuff flares up again, or the person is off the drug completely and stuff is flaring. Again, sometimes there's a very obvious cause and sometimes there isn't. And I want to talk about that because when the person is experiencing this, I think especially when you're early on, so say, acute was really bad and then you start getting windows and waves. And again, it's somewhat predictable maybe, or things seem to be progressing, even if very slowly. And then all of a sudden, boom, like out of nowhere, or again, if there's maybe a trigger and everything flares up. And usually what the person will say is, oh my goodness, it feels worse than ever, worse than acute, or right back to square one. And then usually the narrative goes, I've nuked my brain. I've caused some type of, like, something happened now and it's over for me. Like it's permanent now. The damage is done. This is usually what people say when this happens. And if the person is tapering or reinstating and trying to stabilize, then often, especially with tapering, the person, again, they've discovered hyperbolic tapering, and there's a bunch of different scenarios that could happen. But oftentimes the person is doing a slow taper, things are going okay, and then boom, oftentimes someone will hit a certain milligram dose, and I'm assuming or think it's when that receptor occupancy kind of curve drops, and then all of a sudden, symptoms just flare. Or sometimes things flare for different reasons during a taper as well. But oftentimes it's hitting this certain wall of milligram and potentially combined with other stressors. And then things just really flare and people panic. And so they want to make quick decisions. They're like, what do I do? Do I updose? Do I, what do I do? Where is this coming from? And there's a lot of panic, understandably, because this experience is scary. And then when you feel like you get some level of predictability, then all of a sudden it's just there to kind of sneak up on you again. And so I want to talk about, or I guess normalize this in what is a very abnormal experience overall, but within the context of withdrawal and stabilization, the flaring is it's very much a part of the process. And so what I tell people is, I think it's important, I guess, to understand this. And I've talked about expectations for the withdrawal journey in a couple of recent videos, if you want to check those out. And I think it's important to, I don't even like saying expect in this context, because you don't, you want to expect a smooth ride, because you want to maintain that hope, and it's easier, I guess, to have some level of control and predictability, but also understand that these flares are a very normal part of the journey for most people. And it's very scary, and because this experience is so subjective, it's hard to tell whether those setbacks are objectively worse or just as bad as acute, or maybe because the person has been feeling better, and so this feels particularly bad because it's come back, and relative to where the person maybe was or how they were progressing, this feels particularly bad. And so again, I think having, I guess, that expectation or knowledge that setbacks are part of the journey, as scary as they are, don't lose sight of the end goal, which is proceeding through recovery, trusting through the process, having a blind faith essentially, and time being a great healer. And the one good thing, if you can call it that, I'm always trying to look at the positive when I can, or the one thing that you can view as, I guess, a positive from a setback or a flare or a wave, is that a lot of times the person is trudging along through this process. Oh, sorry. And it's very much a slow process, and it's slower than the person would like. And because you live this experience day in and day out, it's so hard, or can be so hard, to see or feel progress. And often what happens is a person, has this flare and symptoms, and they're like, wow, I realized that I was making progress and that things were getting better, although my perception of that at the time wasn't really there. But now that things have really come up again, it makes me see that I was making progress. So that's the one good thing that can come out of a flare. And another thing, because the person who's on meds tends to panic and try to, decide what to do with the dosage, but also the person who is off the drug is trying to figure out, what do I do? How do I get things to go back to where they were before? So whether it be, sleep is the thing that's the most disrupted now, or maybe they have the terror has returned, or head pressure, or migraines, or I said insomnia, whatever it might be, I often will say to the person, and right away they're going into the horror stories, and I say, first of all, look at your own journey so far. And then I ask them, when you had this symptom, because you're saying what you're feeling now is so much like acute or worse than acute, how did those symptoms start to resolve before this setback? And 9.5 times out of 10, they'll say, nothing. I didn't do anything. The symptoms were just resolving as time was going on and things were improving. And I'm like, okay, so don't panic and make a rash decision right now, in the sense that I have to do something, take something, because when you look back, things were just, as you were supporting your body and, building this foundation of good health, things in your nervous system were settling down. So you have to trust that process again, because it's very rare that I hear the person will say, well, I was doing this complicated regimen and that's what got me better. It's pretty much always, supporting the nervous system in the best way that they can, trying things that kind of they figure out help or work or move the needle, plus time. And so I say, okay, you've got to just trust that that's the process again. I don't know physiologically necessarily what's happening, but things are just, your nervous system is upset again. And so you just have to support it, soothe it as much as you can, and try not to, catastrophize, as impossible as that might feel, and just trust that your body's going to return to that baseline again, and maybe even a better baseline this time. And I know how scary it was for me, because in both of my withdrawals, I had this happen. So if you're familiar with my story, in my first withdrawal, I was still drinking alcohol. I didn't understand the ramifications. I didn't have immediate reactions to that, but I do wonder now if that was continuing things. And I would have probably gotten more relief if I would have stopped, but I didn't really understand the implications of that at the time. And my symptoms just disappeared overnight, and then they returned several months later, seemingly unprovoked. And so at the time, I wish I would have understood setbacks and how they're natural, or waves, or because I didn't really have windows and waves. It was a continuous wave and then a continuous window, and then stuff just returned. And it was very scary because I wasn't in this sort of more wavy, windowy pattern that a lot of people are. And so, and again, I didn't understand causes of waves, causes of setbacks, the dangers of drinking when you're in withdrawal, and just how this process really worked. I really didn't understand it much then, and I wish I would have, because it likely would have prevented my reinstatement. But my reinstatement did teach me a lot, which I've talked about in other videos. But and then in my second withdrawal, there were different causes of setbacks. And every time, it's so easy to panic because your perception gets so off. And again, if you've been feeling well, it's very terrifying to have old symptoms return, especially with intensity. And it doesn't make sense, in a regular context, because it's like, I'm further out. How can I be feeling this bad? But that's just the way this process of recovery works for this particular journey. And so it's like, again, trying not to catastrophize. And also, it's so important to have an outside source to reflect things back to you, because so often when I've gotten to know someone over a period of time, it's so much easier for me to point out the progress they've made than for them to be able to see that in those times of stress. And that certainly was the case for me. The second time around, when I had my support group, there were multiple times, when things would flare, feel particularly scary and bad. And then I'd have people really have to like virtually shake my shoulders and be like, Melissa, it's just a wave. Like, you were doing so much better. It's going to get better again. But I remember what it was like to be in that chaotic frame of mind and that very terrifying experience. And it just feels so scary to have things return, because then you wonder, how long is it going to last this time? What is going on? I don't understand this. What did I do wrong? And you didn't do anything wrong. And I think too, people blame themselves, and that's an easy thing to do in this. And they're just searching frantically for what they did that caused it. And if they know what caused it, then there's so much anger at self and self-blame. Like, why didn't I just trust the process? Why didn't I see that I was doing better and continue on that path? Why did I have to interfere? And I always say, you didn't know, and you're just trying to help yourself. You're unwell and you want to get better. You try things and maybe it was not the right thing to do. And that's, try not to be too hard on yourself, and understand, like a best friend or someone in your support would say to you, you're just trying to feel better. And so it's natural to seek out things, and it just wasn't the right thing. But don't try not to blame yourself, and have compassion for yourself. And that's very hard. And again, that's why it's helpful to have other people to help you through this, especially when things get bad again. And yeah, it's such a difficult thing. And so let me know what your causes of setbacks or flares have been, how you navigated them, and did it help you to see that you were making progress? And maybe that was kind of, I guess, a light bulb for you, a light bulb moment, because up till that point, maybe you were like, I don't know if I'm actually getting better. But then it just took this flare to really see that. That's what happened to me when I reinstated, although it took me a while, even in the reinstatement, to accept that and not be like, oh, I just haven't found the right drug. And, I was in that scary kind of mind frame for a while. But then I finally realized, okay, I need to trust the process. I need to trust the people before me, and just let my body recover. And that's what I did. And that's how I got to where I am today. So I just wanted to share that with you guys, and just tell you and validate for you, and emphasize that this is a normal part of the journey, regardless of where you're at, on the drugs, off the drugs. And sometimes there's a cause, and sometimes there isn't an obvious one. So yeah, I just wanted to share that, and I hope you guys are doing okay, and I'll see you next time. Bye.